going to do some examples from your homework. So when we have quadratic functions, something they might ask you is to graph. They might also ask you to find the vertex, find domain and range, and the axis of symmetry. I'm going to do all of them in one problem. They're probably not going to ask you everything in one problem, but this is everything they're probably going to want to find at some point. So let's first start with the vertex. By the way, we can pretty much find all of these before we even start. So let's try. For the vertex here, I remember that my vertex is HK, where H is the number inside here, and it's being squared. And K is this one over here. So when I want to find HK, I first think to myself, okay, what number is inside these parentheses that's being squared? Well, there's nothing in there, so it's 0. Then over here, my K value is just 5. This tells me that my graph just goes up 5 from the 0, 0. If I want to find my domain, I think to myself, okay, what x value can I plug in here? Well, I can plug in anything that I want. Since I can plug in any x value that I want, my domain is just going to be negative infinity to positive infinity. Now let's talk about my range. This is going to be a graph that points upward. I know that because the number in front here is just a 1. It's a positive value. Because it's a positive 1, I know my graph is going to look like an upward opening graph. So this tells me that my graph, oh, I apologize, back up. This was a negative 5. My apologies, this should be a negative 5 in here. And it makes the graph go down 5. I misspoke, I apologize. When there's a negative 5 here, it makes the graph go down 5. Okay, back to range. Since now I know that my graph is upward opening, but went down 5, my range is going to start at negative 5, because that is going to be my minimum value. This one has a minimum value, and that's going to be negative 5. Then it's going to go all the way up to infinity. We will also be able to look more at these when we look at the graph. So let's just look at the graph and make sure that we're right when we get there. Next, let's find the axis of symmetry. Well, we know this is going to be a vertical line, so it's going to be x equaling something. Now, did my graph move left or right? No. Since it didn't move left or right at all, I know my axis of symmetry is just going to be down the y-axis, where x is 0. So my axis of symmetry is x equaling 0, or you can say the y-axis. Now that I know all of these things about my graph, let's go ahead and see what it looks like. Alright, so we know that our vertex point is 0, negative 5, so let's go down 5. That's going to be a point on my graph. Now that I know that, I want to make my table of values, and I want to find my other values. Well, 5, like I said, well, it went down 5. I know that my x point that I put in was 0. I put in a 0 to get negative 5. So I want to plug in more values that are to the left of 0 and then to the right of 0. So I want to plug in negative 1 and negative 2. Then I also want to plug in positive 1 and positive 2. Now we remember that the axis of symmetry is the y-axis. So if I find these two values, I know that they're going to be the same as these two values. So I only have to find them once. So if I plug in a negative 1 here, negative 1 squared will give me 1. I subtract 5, and I get negative 4. If I plug in a negative 2, I square it and get 4. I subtract 5 and get a negative 1. If I do it for 1 and 2, I know I'll get negative 4 and negative 1. But if you need to plug them in just to make sure, you can. If I plug in 1, 1 squared is going to give me 1, minus 5 will give me negative 4. If I plug in 2, 2 squared will give me 4, minus 5 will give me the negative 1. So now I have my table of values. From here, I just want to put them on my graph. So when x is negative 1, my y value is negative 4. When my x is -2, my y value is a -1. So I know so far it looks like that. Again, it's going to be a mirror image on the other side. So that is what my graph is going to look like. Let's talk about the domain. Is this graph going to extend forever and ever and ever out this way? Yeah, it'll keep getting bigger and bigger. That is why my domain is from -infinity to +infinity. For my range, my values start at -5 and then go all the way up from there. So my range for this one is going to be -5 to infinity. So these are the things that they might ask you in your homework. Let's go over another type of problem. They might ask you to write an equation of a parabola in vertex form and what they're going to give you is first the vertex, and then they're going to give you a point on the graph, just one point. They want you to write an equation in vertex form. Let's remember what vertex form looks like. Y equaling, you could also write f of x here. Remember, f of x and y are the same. This was vertex form for my parabola. So what we need to do is we need to find all the letters and plug them in. When we get done, we're just going to have y and x be y and x. So we need to find a. Well, none of these are my a values, and none of these are a values. So I can't find that one yet. How about h? Remember, h represents the x value for my vertex. So the x value for my vertex is 1. Because remember, the vertex was h, k. So what I'm going to do is take the 1 and plug it in for h here. Then this represented k, and k's out here. So now, if I knew what a was, I could write it in here and I would be all done. But because I don't know, I have to use my points, plug in here, and then solve for a. So I'm given this point, so I take my -5 and plug it in here for y. I take the 2 for x and plug it in there. From here, I just want to evaluate and solve it for a. That way, I can plug it in and I would have my equation done. So I'm going to evaluate 2 minus 1 gives me 1. I square it and get 1. So that's just 1a. I want to get rid of my 2, so I'm going to subtract it to both sides. 5 minus 2 is going to give me a -7. So I've now solved for a. I found a. Since I know what a is, I can just replace it. So I'm going to take my -7, put it in here. And this is equation for my parabola in vertex form. This is what they're looking for.